What's up, everyone? Jeff Lewis from Lewis Physical Therapy and Sports Rehab. I want to break down today and go into a little more detail of the new 10-week program I have out, the Baseball Strength and Power Program, and really specifically how we take that approach from a speed training standpoint, because that's a lot of what it is geared towards more than anything, and how we go about essentially doing a 10-week breakdown of a speed training program, but not just for the speed work itself, and how all these other elements play into that. Now, if you're kind of looking for other good resources on kind of how we go about structuring these, looking into, the kind of Charlie Francis style vertical integration is a great way to kind of look at. That's kind of a lot of what I kind of build, or what I have developed kind of a lot of stuff off of from a framework standpoint, and change a couple things here and there along the way. But it's really, I think it's one of the better models out there, because it just gives a good emphasis on how everything kind of works in unison together versus one element hurting another. So we're going to jump right into it. So from a speed training standpoint, how do we go about progressing someone from week 1 all the way up to week 10? You certainly don't want to just start at kind of all-out sprints, 20, 30 yards right out of the gate. You're going to pull a hamstring, or something else is going to happen there in that case. So how we kind of go about that? Starting up here, 10 weeks here, 4 weeks of an accumulation block, 4 weeks of an intensification. That fourth week is a deload. That's why I wrote 3+1. And then you get 2 weeks of a power block here. But going back to this, I don't have it in here specifically because it does differ for each athlete, but there will likely be, before that 10-week period, some type of GPP phase, depending on what the athlete has been exposed to. It might be 2 weeks, it might be 4 weeks, and that's a lot of just basic circuit work, a lot of med ball extensive work, some tempo runs, power speed, mock drills, really just more than anything, just getting a good fitness base more than anything before we get into it. So going into the accumulation side of things from a speed standpoint, in this initial 4-week period, it's going to be a gradual progression of volume from 10 to 15 yards. The reason we start on the lower end is because when you're sprinting at those short yardages, you're not going to reach top speed, which is fine. We really, in this case, want to teach more positions and really just the exposure to that sprint work more than anything. So I have here capacity versus power. Sprinting is anaerobic in nature more than anything. So really, you should not have speed work. That true speed work is probably not, for most team sport athletes, it's not going to last you more than 5 to 6 seconds, because then you're going to start getting into some other energy systems. But capacity versus power, capacity really just means you're having some shorter rest. So as a general rule of thumb from a rest standpoint, general rule of thumb, for every 10 yards you sprint, you should have roughly at least 1 minute of full rest to make sure you have full recovery of the nervous system, because sprinting is a very nervous system dominant movement. So again, we're starting here capacity. So, maybe initially when we're just kind of getting them exposed to that horizontal position, we're not going all out intensity on these. And that's kind of what we're managing that from a capacity standpoint. If you have a little bit of a less rest, like 30, 45 seconds in between, you're just naturally not going to be able to reach as high a speed as if you have a full minute for a 10 or a minute and a half for a 15-yard sprint. So the first 2 weeks might be more capacity, and then we start switching over to more power work, where we're getting a lot more intensity behind our short yardage sprint work, and you're having more rest as a result. Going down to plyos and medicine ball work. These are all extensive and rebounds in nature. So what does that mean? That means we have a high volume and a very low intensity, very submaximal. It is all about keeping good rhythm, getting good timing of on and off the floor. It is not all out jumps or anything like that. We'll start some of our kind of altitude depth drops here from a very low height. So like a 2 or 4 inch box, helping from a landing mechanic standpoint, but having a little bit of that kind of eccentric exposure from those depth drops. You're going to kind of see how we progress that throughout here. From a weight standpoint, submaximal nature, we're roughly around 65 to 80% for our main compound lifts, moderate to high volume, submaximal intensity. What I will say here in this accumulation side of things, and really for all of these weights, we're going to have concentric, eccentric, and isometric methods, and that is going to depend, the prescription of those methods is going to depend on the block that we're in. So in the accumulation phase here, we're going to have a lot more traditional eccentric work, because when our sprinting volume is not too high, we don't want to do a ton of eccentrics when our sprinting volume is getting ramped up, but it's really just a way to create more structural adaptations and stability. So we are going to have more eccentric work from a single leg standpoint, a hamstring standpoint, arm, a lot of different things. And then we'll also have some isometrics there. Again, the program I have has kind of specific days dedicated to certain qualities. I'm not going to get into that here, but just to expect, that's going to be a lot of what we focus on there in the accumulation side of things. It's not just doing a bunch of reps through the range. That is important, but we need to make sure we are hitting different qualities to better stress the system, prepare it for the upcoming strength block. And then from a tempo run work, we're gradually increasing the volume here. Again, when this short yardage acceleration is relatively low, we're just continuing to build that tempo work as a way to keep our aerobic capacity and fitness up, because a better aerobic base is going to allow you to recover better from higher effort sprints and higher effort strength work. So that's how we want to make sure we are kind of making sure that is being maintained throughout there. And that's really about 2 times a week. So really here, speed is going to be twice a week. Tempo is going to be twice a week. From a general kind of like organization standpoint, I'm going to roughly keep kind of speed, plyos, med ball, and weight drill on our kind of high days, probably 2 to 3 days a week, depending on where they're at in their kind of season. And then our tempo is going to be on our non-high days, our low days, and that should be more recovery and restorative in nature. So now we're kind of going on to the intensification side of things. So intensification just means we're starting to intensify our high intensity elements. So what are our high intensity elements? That is our speed, plyos, med ball work, and our weight. So starting with our speed work, we're now starting to stretch out to kind of 15 to 25 yards. So with that, our rest periods need to be longer. So we have 1.5 to 2 minutes rest in between, because these are higher effort sprints. We need to make sure we are prepared. I cannot say this enough. Speed training is not speed training if you are fatigued. That is, we have to, I think it's an industry that is not talked about properly, and it's not done well enough. People think, I'm just going to run into oblivion and it's going to be, that's speed and whatnot. It really, that is not speed. I care more about quality versus quantity from a speed training standpoint. So that's what you want to be mindful of from an intensification standpoint here. As we are intensifying our sprint efforts, we need more recovery in between. Our plyos and med ball work, we are now switching from extensive to more intensive methods. So the volume gets dropped pretty drastically because our intensity is going up. So whether it's for our med balls, our broad jumps, really whatever that might be, whatever the method is or drill you're using is for that method, it's starting to shift to more intensive more than anything. And now our altitude and depth drops. We're going to go to double and single leg variations, but we are essentially just giving a little bit more height. So it's not like if you're 2 to 4, you're maybe only going to like 6 or 8. If you're starting single leg on these cases, you're going to go a little bit lower. So just be mindful of those things. Whereas we start to increase the height a little bit, the reason with these depth drops, I didn't talk about it here, but any of these altitude depth drops, especially depth jumps as we get over to here, these have to be low volume. These are essentially an overloaded eccentric drill to a degree, so it's not going to be as much, and it's not going to feel as taxing on the musculoskeletal system in the immediate time you're doing it. These are very high stress on the nervous system, so we have to be mindful of those. Okay, so that's our kind of plyo med ball work here. From a weight standpoint, we are now moving into kind of our more traditional max strength weights. So that's going to be about 85% to 95% plus of our weights here. Now, goals that we can have depending on the athlete, I don't think majority of guys do not need to do 1 rep max testing, especially younger guys. I just don't think it's appropriate for them. They don't have great intramuscular or intermuscular coordination, and intramuscular for that matter, coordination to be able to properly, perform and recover from a 1 rep max testing. So we'll go with a 3 rep max, or say if we don't want to have them do a 3 rep max, what is a weight they kind of hit previously for a 3 rep max, and let's have them do an AMRAP, as many reps as possible at that given weight. If 10 weeks ago you could do 315 for 3 for a trap bar deadlift, and now you can do 315 for 8 to 10, well, you've gotten stronger. So that's just a good way for us to kind of gauge that without going into a kind of true grinding 1 rep max test, which most guys just don't need. And volume is going to drop pretty considerably here more than anything, especially your accessory work. There are going to be times in these cases, depending on the individual, I might only do 1 to 2 sets of some accessory work in this max strength phase. And that's only because, again, every guy's different. Some guys tolerate volume more than others, but we need to be mindful if we're not overloading their buckets. There's a lot of high intensity elements here. And then again, tempo volume wise, at this point, we're just maintaining what we've built here before. If you need to drop a little bit, for individuals, as this starts to ramp up and they just their kind of nervous system starting to get fried a little bit, you can a little bit, or you keep one day that's an on-feet tempo and then another day that's maybe more of a bike tempo or a pool, just finding different ways to get some aerobic work and aerobic capacity in, because again, having that big aerobic base is going to help you recover from anaerobic efforts, whether that is speed work, plyo med ball work, weights, or just from your sports standpoint. Majority of team sports, baseball, football, are anaerobic in nature. So we want to make sure we are having that good ability to recover in between. And the last thing is going to be our power realization phase. So we're essentially just trying to take everything that we've developed here and be able to express it in a higher velocity manner that we will have from that will then potentially transfer into our sport. Essentially trying to realize all of the gains we have made up until this point here. So again, from a sprinting standpoint, this is when we are going to have our 30-yard sprints here. Because again, we're also coming off a little bit of a deload week on that last one, so they should be feeling relatively fresh here. They're still building up their sprint volume, but all of these other things are getting pulled down for a week to allow us to be fresh here more than anything. So that is our 30-yard sprints. If you need to go further than that, 30, 40 yards maybe for football, that is totally fine as well. 2.5 minimum. Honestly, I prefer 3 minutes, and it could be 3 to 4 minutes. So like the more time you need, the more I want you to take from that standpoint. Again, you want these to be very, very fresh and high output more than anything. So that's what we want to be mindful of there from that standpoint. Now, going into our plyos and med ball, we are continuing with intensive plyometric and medicine ball drills. Now, in this case, the difference might be I might be doing more maximal concentric force production for some of them versus a lot of like landing-based stuff. So what I mean by that is, hey, instead of a kind of loaded kind of broad jump, loading down and going, I might do it seated from a box where I'm really just focusing on, or even jumping up onto a box, I'm focusing on maximal force production, but I'm pulling back a little bit on the eccentric component from a landing. But then we do want that to come from our depth jump. So our depth jump is going to be our main kind of eccentrically loaded plyo here. You maybe have a week of double leg, week of single leg. If it's the first time doing that for them, stick double leg and start low. You want these to be very reactive in nature. You land and go. You don't just kind of fall into your landing. Land, stick, quick redirection of force more than anything. So that's that. And from an upper body standpoint, we're maybe doing some of our depth plyometric push-ups. Again, very low volume. Just being mindful of that. These are very reactive-based drills. From a weight standpoint, volume gets dropped way low, and we are, intensity, and we are focusing on maximal concentric intent and output here more than anything. So it might be as low as 50 or as high as 75%. If you have a guy that they kind of have to have that constant submaximal presence in their strength work, you might live around that 65 to 75%. But if some guys, they might just be better off of they might be able to maintain some of their qualities to a degree from the higher speed work and plyo work versus kind of doing a lot more of the strength work. But it's maximal concentric intent. And then our last thing here from a tempo work standpoint, we're maintaining that aerobic base. So again, this is a general just kind of, yes, it's a 10-week breakdown for speed training because that's a big topic more than anything. But it really, more than anything, is a 10-week breakdown of how do you go about developing all these different qualities. How do they all fit into one another? And that's what a lot of the program that I put together gives those, really that kind of breakdown of, hey, this is how you kind of plan for X yardage at this volume, these weights and things like that. And it does differ from guy to guy and athlete to athlete, but that is the general framework of what we want to follow here more than anything. And again, this is essentially laid out in the 10-week program. I'll have the link below for those that are interested in it. But this is the general layout that we have for it of how you go about developing all of these qualities in a 10-week program more than anything. So again, if you have any questions on your training or anything like that, drop them below in the comments section. Subscribe to our channel for more content like this. But again, if you want to kind of check this program out, I'll drop it in the link below. And if there's any questions, just drop them in the comments section.